took a retirement package from Nokia earlier this year, and he announced that he will be stepping down as chair of Netconf working group after Prague. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Mehmet. Thank you for his many years of service.
Thank you very much.
At IETF, and wish him, of course, all the best in his retirement. Rather than give a long speech, I put together a slideshow of pictures that were taken by him and his friends on his many trips to the many different IETF locations. But before I run that slideshow, I wanted to announce that today, after Bits and Bytes, we are getting together for a farewell beer bash for Mehmet. It's a surprise for him. So if you would like to join us in wishing him in his retirement, please meet in the lobby at 9:15. We are going to head to a place called Lokal, Hamburg. It's about 10 minutes from here. And Mehmet, please make sure you bring your wife along so she can meet all your merry friends.
Yes.
After the slideshow, Bert, who was co-chair before me, would like to say a few words. So let me just quickly run the slideshow.
Who's going to say? This goes without saying. Or... Shall I say the words during the slideshow? Because this feels like a funeral to me.
Go ahead.
So, Mehmet, thank you very much. I've also been co-chair with you, and it was great to work with you. And, normally I do a Dutch song, but I looked up the words for an English song so that, it's not that you can understand what I'm singing, but also, as a matter of fact, so that people can participate. And it goes like this. I need to read the words. For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow. And so say all of us. That's the American version. And so say all of us, and so say all of us, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow. Say all of us, and so say all of us. Thank you. So thank you very much. This is indeed a touching moment to leave Netconf working group after 9.5 years. I was doing a lot of wrong and bad things. It seems I was unsuccessful. I appreciate very much your words. It was indeed an honor to serve for Netconf working group and the ops area. I am indeed very happy to have worked together with Netconf folks, and especially the authors of the drafts who indeed spent a lot of time, were engaged in many discussions and helped to publish those documents. I especially would like to thank Bert Weinen and Dan Romascanu for their guidance and mentorship from the beginning. It was indeed a real easy life to having Bert as a co-chair. So I was just following what he was saying. It was indeed a really good start and help from him. But I also would like to thank to Benoit for his support all the years, and Mahesh in the last 2 or 2.5 years. So it is a good time. Thank you very much to all for your support and getting Netconf documents done. Thanks.
And with that, we bring the meeting to order.
Okie doke. So this is the Netconf status slide set. Can you go back? There is a reason why Kent is here in parentheses. I will come to this in a second. We need a JavaScript and minute takers. Etherpad is actually for everybody. Please enter your notes there from this session. But we have, as far as I understand, Ignaz and maybe Balach, I don't know, as main minute takers. This would be helpful. Any JavaScript, please. Okay, thanks, Dada. So with this, please enter in Etherpad whatever you think it should be put into the minutes.
The link is on the slide, and you can find it from the Netconf working group status page also.
Okay, this is the new Notewell. The co-chairs are keen on copying the newest Notewell into the status slides. Any submission to IETF intended by the contributor for publication as all or part of an IETF draft, any statement made within the context of IETF is considered as IETF contribution. Please be aware that all contributions are subject to the rules of RFC 5378 and the new RFC 8179, which I didn't yet read yet, but you need to take care of it. Go ahead. Okay, this is the one slide status. Since Chicago, the working group has been rechartered after some longish discussion, but also ISG needed a longer time to approve it. Now it is available. Please look at it on the link. Last call for RFC 6536 bis has been finalized. We will now go to the next step. Zero touch and key store drafts were in workgroup last call. We will check the status today. Secure Shell, TLS, and Netconf REST compliant server models are in workgroup last call. We might discuss one or the other issue today. Yang subscription push draft suite are supposed to be ready for working class. We will check this. Martin raised some issues on the mail list, but Alex and others addressed them mostly. I assume there is one remaining. This will be discussed. So I'm stepping down, and now the introduction also, which has been made on the mail list, but officially in the session, Kent Watson will be the new co-chair starting after IETF 99 meeting. Please welcome him together with me. Okay, the agenda you have seen. We have a package for items which were or are in working last call. Go ahead. Charted items ready to go to working group last call. These are mainly the Yang push drafts. Go ahead. We have drafts fitting the charter. They are subject to adopt. We need to check whether there is already substantial amount of content available before we can adopt. Go ahead. Non-charted items, as it is important for Netconf and DMA, data store architecture. It will be shortly presented here. It has been already presented and discussed in NetMod sessions, but we need to go through it. If somebody has a question, it can be asked, and we can address those questions.
Tim Karinoki, if I could ask a quick question on the status of those elements that are of those drafts that are in the working group last call now. Is there any chance of any of those drafts being published this year? Just trying to figure out what the next half of the year is going to look like in terms of publications.
It is actually the aim to publish if the working group last call is successful. If there are issues we need to solve, and if they are substantial and take more time to solve, it can be delayed, but the aim is to publish as soon as possible.
Okay, so these four here that we're talking about, we're going to try to get those out this year. Is that accurate?
Yes, the Yang push draft set is also in the queue for last call. This will be most likely, if the issues are solved on time, after this meeting in a month's time or so. Yeah, let's see how it goes.
Is there a
Okay.
particular set of drafts that you're
Yeah, the
looking?
client server modules and are some of the big ones that we were trying to track a bit closer. So we were just trying to figure out what the next 6 months might hold.
I mean, the last call is going, as far as I know, after this meeting, still 1 week time. And yeah, please raise the issues during the last call. If possible, provide a way forward if the issue is accepted. And yeah, it needs to be solved before publication.
Yeah, okay, I figured that much.
Benoit Claes. So Tim, don't go away. So this is like a BBF question.
Sure, why not?
No, I mean, that makes a big difference. So, okay, there is like my personal opinion that if we don't publish this in 6 months, it will be like a real concern, right? But now, whenever we've been dealing with different SDOs, sometimes they have deadlines because they're meeting, etc. And I would like to know about those.
I can't remember if these are, I'm sorry, I can't remember if these are part of the BBF common module piece, to be honest with you, or they're just a Nokia track. I just, like I said, I get old. I'm next in line for the retirement package.
Okay, there are three, go ahead to the last agenda slide. There are three documents: accounting, Netconf proxy, and UDP-based publication channel for streaming. I hope we will time for them. I assume we will be good enough to let them present. That's it. So the first presentation is from Kent, I think.
Good afternoon, working group. So this is one presentation for the collection of drafts that are all in last call at the moment. There's one slide per draft. So if you have any questions or comments on, draft, make sure you ask it on the slide that it's showing on the screen. So zero touch is the last call actually completed. There were 4 comments received. Potentially one technical change, and actually I view this as a sort of a soft technical change because it doesn't really change the content of the data significantly or at all. Really, it's just a matter of structuring of the Yang module itself. But the issue regards whether or not the top-level choice statement is okay in a Yang data structure. I think there are a couple of tools, Piang and Andy's tools flagged as an issue, though technically the document, the Yang data structure says that it's okay so long as the top level node always resolves to a container, which it does. So I don't know, it is actually currently on list being discussed, but if we want to discuss in the room right now, anyone have any comments on this issue? Okay, so again, there is a thread on the list right now, and I did actually just poke it, I think, a few days ago. So if others could pick up on that, that'd be great. Next is the key store draft. Again, last call completed. 3 comments were received. Potentially 4 technical changes are looming. I mean, so there are also editorial changes, but I mean, I'm just calling out the technical changes here because these are the ones that would potentially cause a need for another last call. So first is define a separate module for some algorithms for the algorithm identifiers. So currently the QSort draft has a base identifier and then, I don't know, about 10 sub-identifiers for various public key algorithms. Jürgen had a comment about potentially moving those out into another Yang module. I don't know what we'd call it, an crypto algorithm identifier module. It'd be nothing but a bunch of identifiers. So we could, But my concern is that if we were, then we'd probably be tempted to, not just do public key identifiers, we'd want to do symmetric key identifiers and other kinds of identifiers. And it could become, it could grow, right? So that's the concern, but I understand it might be the right thing to do. I don't think Jürgen's going to be in this session, so, but maybe someone else has a comment on this. All right, so this particular item is actually, I replied to Jürgen's comments last night. And so hopefully we'll pick up on it at that there. Next is how should various lists of lists be named? I don't really think we're going to be able to discuss this in the room right now. There's a few ideas floating around, but just be aware that there's some strangeness in the naming of the various containers in the draft. And again, not sort of a soft technical change because it won't dramatically change the structure of the data. Next is how to normalize the data fields in various lists. Similar comment to previous, it's soft technical change. Next, what type should be used for host keys? Actually, okay, so the draft currently says it's something called a one asymmetric key, but ultimately it's an ASN.1 structure, which is kind of unnormal for SSH implementations, which are typically textual based. This was once resolved already. What I did actually is I realized the IETF system module also defines SSH host key the same way. So I just copied and pasted how its definition into replaced the one asymmetric key here. Okay, so next draft.
Wait a second.
Sorry, yes.
So just to understand the next steps for the two drafts which had already working group last call. So you mean zero touch is mostly done? With an update, it can be verified on the mail list and can go to next step?
Yes.
Okay, and key store needs some changes. Defining a separate model is kind of big.
The first bullet point to the largest, the other three.
And as I understood, you already suggested to have another last call after these changes are prepared or provided.
Depending on depending on what we do the first bullet point, if we decide to keep the identifiers in the current draft, then obviously no change there. The remaining three changes, I all said they were kind of soft technical changes. So yes, they're technical changes, but they're not dramatically changing the nature of the data.
But if you have a separate module and rearrange the whole draft.
Yes, that's the first item.
Yes.
If we do that,
Yes.
a new last call would be needed for sure.
Okay. Okay. So go ahead, please.
Okay. Okay, so the SSH client server draft is currently in last call, as are all the other client server drafts. So far, I think it's a week and a half, and so far there's been 0 comments posted. A little bit concerning, but that's the current state. Same with TLS client server, 0 comments have been received so far. For the Netconf client server draft, we've had 1 comment received so far, which potentially has 1 technical change in it. Actually, it's not a technical change, it's an editorial thing, I think. But the design consideration section, should we remove it altogether or move it to the appendix or fix it? Currently, that design consideration section talks about the motivation for, for instance, why do we do call home and why do we support multiple call home endpoints and, the justification for all that. That whole justification is, as it applies to Netconf, this draft, it also applies to the RESTconf client server drafts. So if we keep it, then I think we'd want the identical design considerations section to also show up in the RESTconf client server draft, which then seems redundant, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend moving it out into a third draft, but perhaps we should. Any comments on this? Okay, so this actually is being discussed on list. This is Tom Petch's comment, so I replied to him already last night. And on the RESTconf client server draft, so far, no comments have been received so far. And that is my status for all those drafts.
Yeah, the last 4 are still in last call. So we need to wait until deadline and prepare an update if necessary. for those which need an update, and we will see how you
Benoit
guys
Claes.
decide without me.
Now, you're asking for concerns. That concerns me. There is not much comment, right? I keep hearing all the time that we need to publish faster, but we don't provide comments in last call. So maybe the thing is that we've got a set of documents in last call right now, and we have a next set that will be in last call next, right? So somehow can we just stop thinking about our own documents, and the people who want to have last call sooner, they provide feedback for this set there, and we're going to help the process here. Otherwise, I mean, zero comment, what does it mean, right? So it seems that we've got a discrepancy. We want to publish fast, but we don't provide feedback. If you read it, it's fine, just tell it, it's fine.
So can I have a show of hands of, instead of saying all the documents, a show of hands on anyone has read any one of these set of documents? Oh, fairly decent set. So I think it would be helpful to indicate that, because I think even if it is saying +1, although +1 is not the best of opinions, but saying that you've read it and you have no concerns, even that is helpful to the authors. So would encourage you guys to go on the mailing list. The last call is still open to say, yes, you have read the draft and you believe that the document is either you have no opinion or you have some opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Next is Alex, right?
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So this basically concerns the Yang push, the related drafts. So you see basically the 4 drafts which are in this package basically here. So basically it's the push updates, the subscription for notifications, and then the Netconf, respectively RESTconf and HTTP support for the transport. So one thing perhaps to mention up front, actually there was a hackathon earlier this weekend, which basically showed actually interoperability, basically a Yang push use case, a security use case concerning basically a security gateway for use case discussed in the second working group involving different vendors, implementations of this. So I just wanted to mention this. There's a link here where you can see basically the details of that. In terms of the drafts themselves, we've had just a few updates. Actually, most updates were in Yang push itself. There was one outstanding issue regarding filters concerning basically whether or not it's a node selector, whether we match on values and so forth. So this basically has been resolved, clarified. Basically, it's a node selector, simple semantics, and implementation is basically the concern that was essentially addressed to that. Security considerations have been updated. We have also a clearer distinction between the data store subscription and the stream subscription. That was a little bit, perhaps not clearly enough delineated earlier. Now, basically, we're pretty much done, but there are a few items which are next, which are listed up here. One minor update that will be updated within a week. And the main thing, basically, what also Mehmet mentioned earlier, there were 3 issues raised. 2 are really basically editorial issues, which are being addressed, where we have actually where we're getting some text updates. One concerned basically concerns the context for XPath, how that is being defined. The second one is a clarification regarding that we don't want to have replay capability when you have the data store push. The third aspect, and this is basically the third, this is basically the open minor issue, but it is an issue concerns whether how the stream is designated. Currently, basically, this is done through identity. Martin's suggestion was, why don't we use string for that? So there's trade-off between these. The reason basically why identity is chosen right now is basically so that you have a set of, that basically each stream has an identity, they have a well-defined semantics, it is part of the model, defined as part of that. You can also, if you want to add additional types of streams that you could subscribe to, you can add additional identities. You can also have build your hierarchy. Obviously, if you have a classification subcategorization of that. And if you want to have an ad hoc stream, and I think this is basically where Martin's concern essentially comes from, then you can have something using a custom identity. So that's basically one stream that is custom, and that would basically be any other stream. And if it is so desired to actually also distinguish between different custom streams, then one could do so, or one could potentially also basically add a conditional custom stream name or something along those lines. Anyway, so that is basically, well, this is basically what we have there. On the pro string side is basically just the easy, you can basically ad hoc just introduce new string names, and you're not tied to basically having these predefined in the model. And there's basically one thing where it would be good to get feedback from here, and Balázs is ready to give feedback.
Balázs Daniel Eriksson. I'm actually speaking about the other topic, replay. We have been using an own very similar solution with own change updates used for configuration mirroring with replay. So I am upset that we want to take out replay for. I agree that for periodic subscription, it doesn't make much sense, but for on change notification, on change push updates, I think it is meaningful.
Okay, thank you.
Jason Stern, I had a comment about the stream names. I kind of like the string idea in a way. And I was just thinking, like back in, I think it's 5277, I think it was just a string and they just defined a name that was a standard name. So we could do a string and reserve some name, I guess, reserve some names for the standard ones you want to have well-defined semantics in the spec. It's one option.
Right, yeah, I think that is basically what would then be required to have a bunch of, well-defined names, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other comments on this issue?
Just one, Eric. Go ahead, Eric. I guess he left.
Oh, Eric is online?
Well, he was.
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
is this the only issue remaining, Alex?
That I'm aware of, yes.
Okay, so as the, go ahead. Please state your name.
Yeah, I'm Guanyin Zheng from Huawei. Alex, I think the issue we discussed just now, we should confirm it before let's go. For the co-home parameters and for how to set the unchanged, how to define the unchanged model for that two issue. Okay, thank you.
So what was the second issue? Sorry.
For the
The first one is basically call home, basically that you say basically for the configured subscription, basically when you define the transport, clarifying that basically you would use call home to establish the subscription, that you use call home basically to establish the connection. Is this what you're referring to?
Yes,
That's the first issue.
Yes.
What's the second one? Sorry.
The second is for which expert to support the unchanged subscription. You know, just now we discussed for unchanged. You know, now is defined one by one for duration young, and you know, for the just now we discussed whether can use metadata. I think I can confirm. Yeah, but I think it should make clear. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So before Lara, you go on.
I have one message from Eric.
One second, Lara.
Oh, okay. So,
Do you see it? What he writes? It's a message for you about some pressing big red button only once.
I thought, okay. All right.
Because otherwise you will accept and release the floor at the same time.
Oh, he was
okay,
just there.
maybe then we'll have to wait. I thought I pressed it once only.
So he left now?
Yeah, I guess he.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe Eric, you might want to try coming back again, or just send the question on Jabber.
All right. So why don't we in the meantime let's move to the well, to the other drafts. So request here is basically, okay, we'll discuss this.
Maybe one quick question to give Eric time to join. Benoit Clay speaking. I was trying to quickly check. Is this one an NDA compliant?
Actually, no, it is not. So that is, yeah. So basically, it is not an it is not an NDA compliant. The question is basically whether an NDA compliance would be needed here, because we don't have interplay between between things which are configured, which are non-configured, and so forth, where we normally have those dependencies. So there is basically, so we do have currently basically state that does define basically which subscriptions are in effect versus basically the subscriptions which have been configured. So to follow the NMDA guidelines, that would actually require updates.
Okay, thank you.
So NMDA compliance is always needed. If you are using something from NMDA, you need to be compliant.
Well, but the thing is, well, okay, you can use it also. You can use it with the NMDA architecture, but basically the guidelines that you should collapse the model, and that you therefore basically optimize the model, if you will, because you save some models which you save some objects which are strictly speaking no longer needed. That is basically
once we are near to last call, Yang doctors review will be started, and they will take care of NMDA compliance.
Okay. Rob Wilson, Cisco. So just a quick comment on that. I think you could just name your container without the -state. So still have a state-only container, but just remove the -state at the end of it. Because then if you had configuration in the future, you can change things to being config true. And you don't have config true stuff under a container that's got a -state at the end. So just rename the container properly.
Okay. Thanks.
Lada?
So again, relaying Eric Voigt on Jabber. Per Balas' previous comment on replay, I am replying to his question on Netconf, mailing list presumably. Basically, relay should have a notification ID, so there is not loss duplication in replay items. And my opinion is that a new RPC should be added as part of a new draft in conjunction with notifications too.
Well, did that answer your question?
So a new RPC?
So basically, okay, let Balázs say.
So Balázs Daniel Eriksson, we used notification based on time. So and I don't know, when we say new RPC, will that go into these set of drafts or a complete new RPC later?
There's a new draft that will be presented actually later in this, which concerning notification bundles, and that one actually does have the facilities where you, for instance, link to where you can point actually to the previous message. So you can, for instance, detect and so forth if there are any updates that you missed and so forth, which should address those concerns, but they are not in this draft, right? This is basically this is the notifications to draft.
I think not, but still, replay can be done based on timestamps, not just on message ID or notification ID. Yeah, I just want to state that we need a solution where you can replay at least on-change notifications.
Okay, all right.
So there is
We need to resolve that.
So there is an update necessary anyway, and after this meeting, once the update is available, Mahesh and Kent will decide whether it can go to last call.
Okay.
I mean, based on the available issues and how substantial they are, the decision needs to be taken.
All right. Okay. So let me get to the other three drafts. Actually, there are hopefully less issues, and actually there have been updates as well, but the updates have been more minor natures, basically. So the Netconf subscribe notifications, this had essentially a number of text tweaks, clarification text again regarding replay, etc. And the transport drafts had just general cleanups that we have here. Actually, this is the On the last item, actually, this is information not quite correct. We had actually conversation before that meeting regarding the whole working group last call. We would actually request to go to working group last call because this issue is actually not specific to the notification drafts. There's more general issues regarding gRPC and HTTP compatibility having. But the question was basically, can we have gRPC clients which are automatically compatible with RESTconf? And there's the issue. There's an issue concerning the support of the GET operation in gRPC, but it's somewhat orthogonal to
There
this
was an
here.
update for the slide set where this statement has been deleted, right?
Sorry?
There was an update for the slide set where this last bullet has been removed. As
Yes.
far as-
Right.
Okay, I mean, the dependency with gRPC is not between gRPC and Netconf push drafts. It might be a dependency between gRPC and RESTconf, but I, or the co-chairs, would like to hear more on this issue and discuss whether this issue is relevant for us or not. So I don't know very much the details of such a dependency between gRPC and RESTconf at the moment. We would like to hear more on this at some point. I mean, whoever feels responsible should bring in a few slides or bring it to the main list.
Thanks.
So that's it. Please provide an update for the drafts you are mentioning, and Netconf co-chairs will guide and we will see whether last call can be started soon. So next is Rob. No, still Alex on the bundles. We seem to be on time.
So this
is good.
So this is the other draft that was just mentioned. So this is basically a new draft, not part of the earlier package. This is basically follow-on work concerning essentially providing the ability to bundle multiple records into a single notification, having basically defining common headers for that. And you've seen earlier basically another revision, another version of this diagram that shows how the different drafts relate, basically with the transports, etc. on the bottom, and then basically the subscription and the push updates on the top. So essentially, this essentially would sit right above the notification, right above the transport updates, because this defines basically the message headers they would basically include in those updates. So the purpose is to be able to bundle multiple updates and notification records into a single notification message, and essentially define the header parameters and so forth that would go into that, and basically distinguish between what would go into the record and what would go into the overall bundle. So basically, it's about distinguishing the record contents from the wrapper that the record is basically contained in, and basically having the wrapper be able to bundle multiple notification messages. Essentially, this, well, at the core of this is a Yang model, and basically this defines basically the notification messages. First, for basically a single notification message, where we have basically a message header with the fields that you see here: record time, type, subscription identifier, and so forth. One item perhaps to point out here is the object on the message generator idea. It's the second from the bottom. This basically is to deal with the possibility of distributed subscriptions, where you can have different notification or streams that originate from, for instance, from different line cards that you want to distinguish where they are from. Actually, there's touch points with another draft that Chanran and Walker are going to present later on, that basically goes actually more into those issues. Anyway, so that's basically the notification message containing a single record, and then there is the bundle, which you see here. So there you would have a bundle notification message where you have basically where you split the information that is valid for all records which are in the bundle from the individual records, which would then basically be contained underneath that. And that's okay. So next steps to that is to basically to review, revise the data model. There are a few fields which may be a little bit overspecified, so we will take a look at that. And we want to also basically align this with the concept of having multiple message generators for subscription. So this is something which is currently alluded to within this, so that you can have one subscription, you have multiple message streams originating from different line cards. This seems actually somewhat orthogonal, so maybe this is something that will be pulled out, potentially also combined with we had some conversations with Chanran and Walker regarding the other draft. It might actually fit better there. So this is basically some of the ongoing discussions if we should pull it out. But anyway, so this is where we are. That's what I have. And the question is also basically if the working group is interested in this work.
All right, so let me ask that question. So before I do that, so you believe that the document is ready for work group adoption?
Yes, so that's what we want to request, yes.
Okay. All right. So with the show of hands, please indicate whether you believe that the working group should take up this particular document. Okay, a fairly decent show of hands. So I think we will then issue a call on the mailing list for work group adoption.
Thanks.
Okay, next is Rob giving a summary as a bridge between NDMA and Netconf drafts.
So I'll try and not bore you to death with this because I think in MDA you've heard a lot about it. So effectively this is a very quick intro to 3 drafts you're about to hear from Kent and Phil presenting them. So I just want to tie those together. So this is just a reminder what an NDA is. The key points are the operational state data store and splitting between what the operators are asking the device to do versus what it's actually doing. And if you look at the implications for that, we know the data models are changing. There's been lots of discussions this week about that and how to modify the data models to be NMDA compatible. We're talking about potentially deprecating Netconf get, but not at this stage over time. But there needs to be new Netconf and RESTconf additions to support operational data stores. And this is the picture that I've shown in NetMod and is in the draft. And you'll see obviously what we've now got here that's different from what was there before is new data stores. We've got the intended data store, we've got the operational data store, and we've potentially got dynamic data stores as well, supported by I2S. So we need to add protocol extensions to Netconf. It already handles data stores fairly cleanly, so there's extensions there. RESTconf has to have similar extensions to that. That's a bit trickier because they have a sort of combined view today. So Kent will explain how we're planning to handle that. But the key point I really want to pull out here is that the scope of both of these drafts is trying to do minimal changes and extensions to Netconf and RESTconf to support NMDA. So we're not trying to go any further. We're trying to get these documents and drafts done as quickly as is pragmatic in this organization. And finally, it's worth mentioning that Yang library is also going to be updated. That's used by both protocols. And the solution there effectively works in the same way for both of them. So that's all I had to say. I think questions are probably best directed both to Kent and Phil at appropriate. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so as promised, the update to Yang library, or the proposed update to Yang library. So the motivation for wanting to do this is first that existing RFCs don't provide an ability to express all that's needed. RFC 7950, which is Yang 1.1, and 8040, which is RESTconf, say that all Netconf and RESTconf servers must support 7895, which is the Yang module library. Sorry, is there a question already?
Yes, this is a question to draft author and NetMod co-chair. Is it allowed that a Netconf draft changes or updates Yang language RFC? Shouldn't it be decided in NetMod working group?
Okay, yes, good point. I'm not sure exactly how we should move that forward, but yes, yes. And to be clear, the update to 7950 isn't so much to the Yang language itself or the syntax to Yang. It's more having to do with the statement that it says, because 7950 describes the XML encoding for Netconf, and it's really regarding the statement that it says that the Netconf servers must support Yang libraries. So it's not really to Yang language itself. It's just to that statement about the conformance for Netconf servers. If you actually, if you want to pop the stack, there's even a bigger question about, the Yang next and wanting to factor those things out of Yang 1.1 and moving those conformance type statements into some Netconf controlled working group document. But at the moment, you're right. It is a NetMod working group document. Another comment?
Yeah, Andy Behrman, we already have capability URIs for candidate, writable, running, and startup. So how does this proposal interact with them? If I advertise candidate, am I allowed to put something in here that says some config equals true node is not supported in candidate?
No, but maybe the potential collision or confusion.
Is there any value at all in listing modules that are only used in the conventional data stores?
So this might be a better question to answer on the next slide, but quickly, the one issue might be if you connect to a Netconf server and it sends a hello and it says it supports the candidate data store, but then you go to the Yang library, this will propose Yang library, and it says the candidate data store is not there, right? That would be an inconsistency. But I view that more as a bug on the server, that it would even provide that inconsistent data view. Another comment?
Romash Khan, actually addressing that issue that was raised by Mehmet. My personal view is that we shouldn't agonize too much over it because, so first of all, process-wise, I believe there is no rule that says that an RFC that was worked by one working group cannot be updated by an RFC that was worked by the other working group. And for all practical purposes, it's the same people in two different rooms, and actually you can just run the last call, copy the NetMod working group, and we are fine. So that's my opinion.
Thank you for that.
Balázs Eriksson. It is strange that some data stores will be advertised as capabilities, while I don't know if we intend to have a capability for intended or operational. Also, what does it mean that, let's say, I support intended? If I just copy over in the running to intended, is that support already? So please make some statement. What does it mean to support such a data store?
Sure. Okay. So first off, again, it's on the next slide, the tree diagram. But the proposal is that there's a list of data stores, and each data store has a list of properties, and those properties are closely aligned to capabilities. So you'll find property names like writable, running, and validate, and whatnot. So there is this ability also to provide the comparable support. It's not for Netconf, it's redundant, but for RESTconf, it's necessary. There's no other way to describe these things. Second thing is regarding the support, what does it mean? I think in part, the definition of the intended data store is defined inside the revised data store draft, so it's really to be taken up there. But also, it's what it means is that there exists a data store, a resource that you can get views from. It's read-only resource, so does that answer your question? Yes? Okay, let me continue. Again, with the motivations, we're still on the second bullet point here. So these two RFCs say that 7895 must be supported, regardless if they support NMDA or not. And so we want to leverage this requirement. So that, this Yang module library 7895 it's got the hook. It's the must thing that all servers implement. But then if you look to 7895, what does it say? It says that there's a mandatory to implement module state tree that a server uses to advertise all the modules it supports. This module state tree assumes that all modules are in all data stores. There's no ability to differentiate which modules are where. So that's not actually the case with NMDA, right? Some modules may only appear in the operational data store. So if you think about, for instance, the network topo model, then the ITRS working group where they talk about underlays and overlays, it could be that a server only supports presenting the underlays, the topology it's discovered from the network, without any ability at all to configure the overlays. So here's an example where a module would only appear, or a server might only support it in the operational data store. Similarly, some modules may only appear in the dynamic data store. If you think about, for instance, the NITRS ephemeral RIB, where it's never expected that it would actually be configured anywhere else. Another example is some modules may only appear in running when a server hasn't yet been coded to support the op state yet. And I actually have a slide that touches on this more, but it's sort of a migration, a graceful migration phasing strategy that we're suggesting. And lastly, there may be variations in features and deviations between these data stores. So, in the running or conventional data stores, traditional features and deviations are there. But then if you were to look, for instance, to a dynamic or operational, there actually might be a variation in the features and deviations that are being in effect at that data store. Okay, so summary of changes to 7895 that are being proposed. So first off, it's renaming the document title from Yang module library to just Yang library. This is because the tree diagram is no longer just about modules, it also is about data stores. And furthermore, we want to sort of, it's a hedging bet to, in case there's any future extensions that are desired, server metadata info, this is now providing a place where that future metadata could be augmented in. It deprecates the module state tree because that particular tree assumes all modules are defined in all data stores. And we have a comment to the mic, please.
I'm not sure that this change going from Yang module library to Yang library only is really useful, because I believe the semantics is slightly different, and this can even more become confusing with the normal term that we use. The libraries usually are some software libraries that we use. We have already libraries that are called YangLib and LibYang and so on. So perhaps I personally don't like this term library for this purpose very much. If native speakers could come up with something that's, we already have Yang catalog, unfortunately, used for other purpose. So
okay.
I don't know. This Yang module library really means that it's a library of Yang modules, whereas Yang library is I don't know. I'm not in favor of doing this change exactly. Although, of course, in many cases, it's only used as Yang library without the module word. So
it's not the best name, but in defense, I think everyone refers to it as Yang library. Then no one actually probably even knows it's called the Yang module library. Another comment?
That was going to be my comment. It's everyone in common parlance calls it Yang library. There's really, we're actually helping people, because when they go to when they want to find out what Yang library is, there's actually a document called Yang library instead of finding a document called Yang module library and wondering where the definition of Yang library is. I understand your confusion. The developer would look for libyang.a if you said Yang library. So I understand the confusion, but it's just common use.
my experience is that any person that just comes new to Yang and reads some stuff about that becomes confused, especially if they are software developers. They always ask about what kind of library is this, and so.
Okay. So this one's easy to take to the list and resolve there. The last, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, okay, another comment coming?
Andy Reardon. So the original module state that's completely cut and pasted and started over actually says nothing about data stores. Your additional data structures that point into this say something about data stores. So the idea that we need to deprecate the original thing because it doesn't support this new stuff that's added years later seems rather strange to me.
Okay, that's a fair point, actually.
You can just make your leaf refs point at the thing that's already there instead of the cut and paste.
That's a fair point. So we did, we kind of went back and forth, but in the end, we felt like the simplest, easiest thing would be to use the existing grouping, which is why it does look like an exact copy paste. And since we did, in the end, we could actually just not deprecate module state and point to it. Of course, module state has the dash state, and to be NMDA compliant, we might want to take this opportunity to back out of it. But I understand what you're saying.
Rob Wilson, Cisco, I thought there was two reasons we did this. One was because at the moment, module state tree defines that all modules define in all data stores, and we're changing that. Doesn't it? Okay. The other point was we wanted to actually put an extra layer into the tree so that when you're accessing this information from a client, you could all get it in one request. And I think if we're accessing this existing module state tree, that would be more of a hassle.
So certainly the second comment is true. Going back to the first comment, you're right, it doesn't actually say that, but the semantics that are understood when people go to module state, if a legacy client were to go and ask for the Yang library, it would get module state and think that all these modules are implemented in all data stores. So perhaps even though it's the same, it's still a list of modules, it's in a different location, and that location doesn't have the semantic. There's legacy clients can't reason it to mean anything other, or in the legacy way. So we can take that to the list. Updates to 7950 and 8040. These are actually they're updating these drafts in the same way. In both cases, there's a section in those drafts where they're claiming or stating that Yang library, where module state module must be referenced, and we just want to change that to instead point to the new path, Yang library modules module. So here's the proposed tree diagram, and again, underneath the module list is actually it's just using the grouping from the existing Yang libraries. So that block of descendant nodes should look very familiar to you. So there is a list of modules, and then there's a list of what we call module sets. So each module set is having an ID. So this is what RESTconf sort of refers to as the module set ID, or it could be used as that for that purpose. And then the module set is pointing to a list of modules. So what are the modules inside this module set? And then and they're being referenced by ID, not by the tuple of name and revisions. So this actually is a little bit cleaner. And then lastly, there's a list of data stores, which is pointing, and each data store is pointing to which module set it supports. I know that it says actually it's optional, it's not mandatory true, but it should be mandatory true. In addition to which module set that data store is pointing to, there's also a list of properties. So this is where we were saying before about how some, like the running data store could say it's writable running. It would have that property. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say here. Yes, the last point is that all the conventional data stores would be expected to point to the same module set. So there'd be data store entries for running and intended and candidate, startup, but all of them are expected to be pointing to the exact same module set. So there's no inconsistency between the modules that are being supported, and specifically with regards to the features and deviations, right? Okay. Flexibility provided. So with this, servers can state how they support modules per data store. NMDA implementations can phase in operational support on a module by module basis. I think this is very important. As servers go to implement NMDA, it would be massive if they suddenly had to implement all modules, with the applied view, instrumenting all that backend logic to provide the operational view of all the values. But being able to do it on a module by module basis sort of allows for graceful migration. Just a point here about the config false nodes don't count because config false nodes would always show up in operational. So when you say that you're supporting a module in, for instance, only in running, it doesn't detract from the fact that config false nodes still show up in operational. Last bullet point, the NMDA implementations may only support the operational view for specific modules. Server only supports providing, so we talked about this one before. Some more flexibility enables deviations and features per data store. We talked about that as well. And of course, all conventional data stores would point to the same module set. Hence, there'd be no inconsistency between them. And that was my presentation. Any more comments?
So let me see my understanding. So you want to be able to say
That's
that
Andy
the
Bierman.
Andy Bierman, so that the foo node is type int32 in the running data store, and it's type string in the candidate data store, and it's type decimal 64 in the operational data store. That's why you want to put deviations per data store, to allow the implementation to have a different data type and whatever in each data store. That seems rather.
I don't think it's specific to data types. I mean,
That's
that
not a
wasn't-
feature to
that
the
wasn't
NMS
running
people.
example, but maybe Phil could respond to this. It was actually he was
Wow.
pushing for this.
Sure, because that's not what the deviations are for. Deviations are for the implementation to say, I'm breaking the rules. I'm doing something wrong. You know, in the past, we've been able to just say, oh, everybody follows the rules. Deviations are a way to express that ability to say, I'm broken, or for somebody else to say, he's broken, and be able to express that in a programmatic way that an application can take advantage of. It's not saying, yes, we want to break all the rules, because that makes a world in which we don't want to live. But we want to live in a world where we understand which rules have been broken, and you know, the expectation is you go to your vendor and you say, here's the list of rules you broke. Go fix them.
Adel Hutka, I believe it could be opportune to integrate schema mount information into this, because for one, it's not clear if we have a mount point in a module that's in multiple data stores, whether the schema mount is supposed to be applied to all data stores or not. I don't know, but maybe second more important point is that I believe this Yang library information is not only some machine readable data that it doesn't matter whether it's complicated or simple. I believe this is some kind of metadata that we might want to use for other purposes. We have earlier today we discussed how to validate instance data against some data models. So this might be useful to specify in some way. Before, Yang library was really just a collection of modules, because we didn't have any other mechanisms to do it more complicated. Now we have data stores and we have schema mount, and I think it's really important that we think about all this and try to come up with something that makes sense and that people can really understand and use.
Tim Karinoki, I do have a question. So by changing this and adding the data stores in the libraries, you made a statement that said you can now provide a migration path where, you know, some can be old, you know, use the old way, some using the new. And could you just expound on that just a little bit further? Because I'm trying to understand what your thoughts behind of how that might be used for migration.
Sure. So this draft says that a server implements NMDA if the operational data store can be the resources available, or if this module is present, or if you yeah, okay, those are basically the two things it says. But what does it mean that the server supports operational? Does it suddenly mean that all the modules are present in operational? And we don't think that is, I mean, necessarily immediately true. You would have the server code would have to be modified in order to provide that operational view. The backend logic has to be modified in order to actually look to the line cards and hardware to collect the applied state to populate that response. We just believe it's going to take time, and so for servers that implement, you know, dozens or hundreds of modules, you know, you can imagine them, you know, prioritizing those over a year or two or three, but it wouldn't be immediately. So this is what provides them an ability to sort of, you know, present some applied state in operational while, you know, over time and more.
Well, Daniel Eriksson, I thought that the simplest way of migrating would be just to, if you get data for operational, you just copy it over the running. And whenever you have the code for really noticing the differences, then you modify it. Is that compliant with?
This is an option that we could take up. If we did do that, then I think that the response should somehow have a flag or an attribute to indicate that that's what it did, what the server did. But maybe that's what we do.
That's why I think clarification of what support really means is needed.
Well, the intent is there. I think we all agree with the intent. How we satisfy that intent is sort of what's that issue. So I'm okay with if we want to consider alternatives.
Benoit Claes, on the same topic, sorry, and trying to understand what Andy mentioned is that the IETF Yang library does not mention it as store, right? So if it doesn't, then we don't need to update it, meaning that we could just augment if we want to refer to data stores and potentially schema, right? Which means that potentially we don't need to update 7950 and 8040. Is this correct?
So, in my response to Andy, what I was saying, okay, imagine you have a server that exists today, and then it's updated to support NMDA, but it's still, we're not removing the existing module state tree, and the server wants to continue to support legacy clients. So I have a mix of legacy clients plus NMDA aware clients. The legacy clients would go to the module state to get to see all the modules supported. Presumably those that are in running would be present. But the server would potentially also support more modules, maybe for instance in dynamic data stores, right? But if those new modules that would also show up in module state, then the legacy client would also see them and probably assume that they're configurable through running, even though that's not the case.
Why assume?
Because that's how they're coded today. They go to look to list of modules in module state, and just as there's no indication or a flag to specify that which data stores that are available in the existing module state.
That's right. So they have to go to the new module there to discover it.
The legacy client wouldn't do that.
That's right. But I mean, they can do that today. So.
I'm sorry, I don't
They
think that answered your
can
question.
still not do that today anyway, right?
I don't understand the question.
Right. Yeah.
Are you saying deprecated in place? Phil Schaefer, Benoit, are you saying deprecated in place? Make this new thing that people go to and just kind of, without explicitly deprecating the existing modules hierarchy?
Yes.
Is there a place where we can augment? Because I thought it didn't have a root.
Module state's the top level container.
And we want to get away from modules.
We'd like to have a separate top level container that we could target to retrieve all those server metadata info in one response.
Okay, Andy, okay, I agree with what you're saying. So a legacy client sees the new module, it says config equals true, but it's really I2RS and it's not going to be writable in candidate or running. And they will try to write it in candidate or running.
Correct.
Unlikely, but scenario, but yes, it's safer to not confuse the legacy client.
So we can continue the discussion on the mail list or offline also. This was in the, it is covered by the charter. It has been asked for to prepare. So it is good that we have it. Just a question, do you want to add something before adoption, or do you think it is ready to adopt?
I think it's ready to adopt. Of course, once adopted, it becomes a working group document, and we can edit it and modify it any way we need to.
So there is nothing substantial missing?
No.
Okay, so go ahead, Mahesh.
All right, so the usual question for adopting. Show of hands for people who believe that this document needs to be adopted. All right, sizable size. So I guess we will make the call again on the mailing list.
Okay, next is Phil on NMDA for Netconf.
My presentation is short. We want to add in, my presentation is short. We want to add in NMDA support to Netconf. We do this through two new operations, get data and edit data, which are essentially get config and edit config, pulled over with a new target leaf that is of that supports the new data stores. Get data supports the origin attribute, so that you can figure out in operational data where your data comes from. It codifies hierarchical persistence so that for any parent, for any child, you can a child's origin attribute defaults to its parent. In addition, we augment 3 operations to add a new data store leaf. And that's it. How's that for easy?
Jason Stern here. Can you go back to your first slide? Something just triggered me on the get. Should that be a source leaf or a target for the get?
I believe it's called target in the existing.
Today for get config, do we make it a target? It's source. Okay. So maybe that should be source.
Okay. And it may be source, and I wrote the wrong thing.
So this might be a question that Andy might ask again, but let me prompt him by saying, in the last meeting in Chicago, the question on what happens to get came up. Any thoughts on, is get going to get deprecated? Is it going to be augmented, replaced?
My feeling is to get should be deprecated because it's poorly defined.
And there were some people who were feeling it should be kept. So, I mean, if people in the room are in favor of deprecating, is fine, and they can. People in favor of keeping get need to speak up.
Andy Bierman, I don't have any problems with this draft or the ResConf. It's all fine to me. I would just like one clarification in the NMDA architecture. Because this is an identity ref, I don't have to actually support the operational data store. I could support Bob's operational data store. And I want to make sure that for conformance purposes, a server must support the real operational. They may support additional operationals, but they must support the real one. And I think this is something Balaz also brought up. We want to know, do you really support this data store? And we'd like to, see that conformance that an NMDA device is going to support the real data, the real operational, and the real intended. The identity ref allows anything that uses the same base. And so for conformance, I'd like to say these mandatory ones you'd have to support, and you may add your own, but you may not, for conformance purposes, replace the standard one.
So Yang library should give you the information on what a device supports and what it won't. I hate putting that kind of mandatory language into any definition because it prevents future evolution. Let's say in the same way that that the language in the Yang spec that binds it to Yang library rather than just to a particular RFC rather than just having that information external requires us to update that particular RFC. I'd much rather have flexibility in how standards are used, even though we only see how they're used today. And
but we could always add more things later.
That one would expect your Yang library request to return the operational data store and what module sets are supported by it.
Right now, we only had 3 standard data stores, and a server implementation is not allowed to make up any new ones. Okay, so that is useful for the client to know who would like to code to an architecture rather than an implementation.
That is, I actually see it the other way. It's limiting in terms of the implementation because if I want to come up with.
But I want to have a standard that has interoperability value. I don't want massive flexibility. So that's my opinion.
Could you go to the next slide, please? Maybe I made a mistake. The next one down, the validate one. Yeah. The lock, unlock, and validate is per data store. Did I understand? Excuse me. This is a clarifying question. The validate is per data store. That's what that means there.
Yeah, the current spec for lock and unlock has a specific set of data stores that one can lock. We want to make that generic by saying supply an identity.
Okay. Um,
So can I interrupt? So is validate also for all the data stores, or is it just for the intended?
So you can't request a validate of intended because intended you already know is valid. You can't have an invalid
Okay.
intended. But it would allow you to validate running or startup or
Dynamic?
candidate or dynamic
Okay, that
or
was,
whatever we come up with in the future.
that's what I'm focused on dynamic. Let me then ask thank you. That was the first part of my question.
And this also allows you to lock and unlock dynamic. And this is
That's wonderful. That's really great. Now, on the specifics of what you do if you don't have the standard validate, that's something you define in the data store. Where does that? So if you have additional validation, let me be really specific. For the I2RS ephemeral, by the requirements we described, there's some additional validation. You can go from ephemeral to config as far as constraint or to ops or a couple other, but you can't have something go from config to ephemeral. That's a validation piece that we sent as part of our requirements. I'm assuming that's what that validate does, or is it supposed to do something else? Just as clarification
it does.
on how you envision that.
I envision it as doing the validation operation for that particular database. If you have rules for your, or sorry, not database, data store.
Mhm.
If you have rules for your data store that say, here are the rules for validity for I2RS data store, then that operation would would inform you of validations of those.
Okay, we're aligned in that thought. Okay, thank you very much.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson. I was missing two things from the get data operation. I thought we will be able to filter on origin, and I'm definitely missing, and I'm needing a filter that allows me to get only the config false data. Is that intentional, or will that be in?
We don't have that now. We can certainly add it.
Please do so.
Of course, origin itself is a feature, so that would be optional.
Yeah, Kent, just responding to that question. If we were to add that, that'd be a separate RFC. How to do filtering on metadata, generic RFC. It's not necessarily specific to NMDA.
Config false is not. Does that concern also sorry, does that mean also you don't want to filter on config true, config false? Because I think that was one of the main reasons why we had separate state trees or subtrees originally.
So the RESTconf protocol already has the query parameter for content, so you can do that in RESTconf. I don't think it's possible.
There's no reason we couldn't add it to.
But even then, that's different than filtering on metadata, which is what the origin is. And
You're talking about like get state or
Get state. Config false is my main need. The other, I just thought we might have it.
And of course, even though you're doing get false, you're actually, all your identifiers will be config true, so.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that my gut is that some sort of way of getting config true versus config false separate from being able to filter on metadata might be useful. Back to validate, I thought there was still a bit of an open issue. We were talking about validation and what it means. I mean, this draft, the NMDA, or actually the data stores draft, talks about templates. And even though we don't define them, we talk about template expansion between, I guess, running and intended. Can't remember where the expansion happens.
Yes.
So, and that template expansion can change whether something's valid or not, right? Like,
well, since it ends up in intended, it has to be valid.
So, I mean,
so it could
so with templates before expansion, sometimes configs are not valid, right? Like leaf refs may not be completed, et cetera, until that template's expanded.
Right. So you could have a running that is in fact that doesn't validate, and then
or a candidate. I'm more thinking you edit the candidate, you fill in a template.
Yeah. So candidate gets copied to running, running gets the template mechanism run against it, fills in a complete intended, and then that flows.
Yeah,
into
so I can see
operational.
how intended would be valid, but are we now saying that implementations that have a template mechanism no longer have valid candidates?
Yes, or running.
I guess it's not really related to this draft specifically, except this draft is the first one that kind of has language around template expansion.
Yeah, and that's part of why we tweezed all these apart, so that you can have a template mechanism that affects your candidate or running. Imagine a template mechanism that fills in. You have a mandatory field.
Yeah, exactly.
And your template mechanism fills it in all the time as false.
Yeah, so I mean, I can see how it completes it and intended can become valid. I'm more worried about now that is this draft, is the data stores draft almost kind of telling us now that implementations with template have invalid candidates, which is not really a concept we really kind of.
Well, it's kind of a concept we fuzzed over. So this puts it in a more stark contrast, and that's why you see it more. But like under Genos.
Yeah, so would you guys
the candidate
return fail to see your candidate now if someone runs a validate?
Well, part of the validate operation, as opposed to so if a client comes and fetches the candidate configuration, they'll get the raw data.
Yep.
That mandatory field will be missing.
That's right.
If you do the validate operation on the candidate, it will succeed because the template mechanism will be run in place to generate the full configuration.
Well, if you're running validate on your candidate, the contents of the candidate itself is not valid because that's not expanded until it's in the intended.
But again, the purpose of the validate operation is to see, when this is committed, will this be valid?
We can take this discussion also to the mail list, or
okay,
you guys can continue discussing later.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's fair to put this on the data stores draft, but the data stores draft is the one that brings up this template expansion, so we may want to figure out what we want to say about it.
We left a lot of fuzziness that we're trying to clarify.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. Lada?
I want to sort of second what Jason said. I had a very similar comment during the NetMod session. I think we have to be a little bit careful here because what validate means, because Yang spec says that some properties have to be satisfied in all data trees and some properties need to be satisfied in valid data trees. I can imagine templating mechanisms that break even those properties that are like data types. For example, you put an asterisk instead of a name or something like that. So I really think this needs to be clarified, what a template, because templates are only mentioned in a very hand-waving way in the NMDA draft, as you said, basically. But in terms of what a schema means, whether really it can be broken in candidate or in running, even that's quite an important point, I believe.
We can certainly. So I don't want at this point to have to specify what a templating mechanism is or any sort of standard thing, but we can certainly say here are rules templating mechanisms cannot break. You cannot break individual data types. You cannot break keys. You cannot break hierarchy. All of this for the candidate and running have to be in place.
Okay, we need to move on. Please, quick last question.
The Yang standard contains the sentence, the running config data store must always be valid. If we have this templating mechanism, is this sentence still true?
That is not true, and it for many implementations hasn't been true since the start.
Maybe some update needed for that.
Yeah. Are you done?
Yep. Thank you.
Just a question. Is there anything substantial you want to add before adoption, or is everything you mentioned here already in draft?
Filtering on origin was not in the draft. Rules for templating was not in the draft, and that was the first one. There was a third one.
I personally would be in favor of having those things in the draft before adoption, but I let Mahesh speak.
Well, also the question on validate. I think there's quite a bit of clarification required. So I would second Mehmet's opinion that I think we probably might want to put that in before we make a call for adoption.
Even in a draft state, we would need such text a little bit, at least.
Yep. All right, thank you.
Kent, NDMA for ResConf. So this was again a draft covered by the charter, and it'll be just adopted once it's ready.
Okay, so introduction. This solution is backwards compatible with the existing ResConf servers. Backwards compatibility is achieved by only adding new top-level resources. ResConf defines /data, and we're introducing a new top-level resource, thereby leaving all the semantics for all the existing resources alone. Summary of updates. As just mentioned, we're adding a new top-level resource. This was /DS. I know we shy away from acronyms, but and after looking at data store /data store many times, it became obvious that it was just going to be too long and ugly. So /DS. We also add a new query parameter with origin. This is to enable the filtering on data based on per origin. It states that section 354 paragraph 3 doesn't apply for all the new DS resources. This is the one that says that if a particular leaf is being referenced, the resource is being referenced, and its value is the same as the value of the default value, then the server must return it, even if it's a server that has the explicit basic mode. We believe that the server should, be allowed to continue to use its standard with defaults behavior, even in that case. So this actually isn't specific to NMDA in particular, but we're kind of addressing and what we think is an oversight or an issue with ResConf draft, and we get to do it because we're defining a new resource. So we're taking advantage of this opportunity. Again, this draft does not deprecate the /data resource, but maybe it should. I mean, something that we could discuss, right? Speaking some more about the /data DS resource. Data store is encoded as an identity, as was mentioned before. So for instance, we have the standard identities, which are defined inside the revised data store draft in the netmod working group. So they're all prefixed with the module name IETF-data store, but then other RFCs can define their own identities. So for instance, an example DS ephemeral draft could define a DS ephemeral data store, and yet they all show up because they're identities. We did this in particular because we, in lieu of having an IANA defined registry, this is much more dynamic and flexible. This is why the motivation for using identities instead of just a flat list of strings. Some conformance verifications, so clients can test either if operational exists. How does a client know if the ResConf server supports NMDA? They can do the head operation, HTTP head operation on that URL just to see whether or not the resource exists, or if the Yang library container exists. This is being the new revision. So here you could either do a head or a get operation. Oh, by the way, I guess in theory you could do a get operation on the operational, but you would get back all the data, which is ridiculous, right? You would never want to do that. That's why I didn't show that as an example. But if you're, the resource is actually targeting the Yang library, get maybe appropriate, because in the end, one of the very first things a ResConf client would want would be the Yang library. So in one step, it can both check to see if the server supports NMDA and get the contents of the Yang library. So probably preferred would be one of these latter. It shows here that you could, the client could either check for the Yang library underneath the new top-level resource or the legacy top-level resource, right? Because both would provide the same content. But at the bottom here, we prefer the NMDA-aware clients not use the /data resource, so that resource could be deprecated more easily someday. Protocol operations, for the most part, all protocol operations defined in 8040 for the /data resource apply to the new data stores, with some exceptions. These exceptions are, one, dynamic data stores are excluded, as each dynamic data store definition needs to be reviewed for what protocol operations it supports. This actually goes to the revised data store draft, where it talks about dynamic data stores and specifically calls out that, you know, each dynamic data store specifies the protocols, and even if it says it supports Netconf, it may not support, for instance, locking in Netconf. With it, like an ephemeral data store, there's no notion of Netconf. So surely the dynamic data stores are excluded from that comment. Some data stores are read-only by nature, for instance, the / intended and also operational, so any attempt to modify those data stores would fail. Also, as mentioned before, the paragraph 3 of section 354 doesn't apply, and of course the new query parameter with origin. That's it.
Raja Hutka, what is now actually the meaning of the unified data store in RESTconf? Isn't it that it's now more like a candidate if, for example, an implementation has the applied data stores, so that I can somehow edit this unified data store, but does it mean that it will be immediately the stuff edited will immediately appear in applied if it works this way? I mean, if it's applied immediately.
So the unified data store is the /data resource.
Yes.
And underneath /ds, we have the new data store specific resources where they take on the more traditional or data store specific semantics. And so they're no longer unified. There is no unified data store underneath /ds data store. That said, we were cognizant or concerned about this, that you may have an NMDA aware server that, you know, maybe someday only wanted to present the new resource without presenting /data. And so with the properties, remember in the Yang library presentation, I mentioned each data store has properties. One of the properties, I think it was called auto commit, something like this. And it was intended, if you read the description statement for it, it's intended to be used for the running data store. And what it gives you is essentially the unified data store like behavior where, you know, whether or not the server actually implements startup, regardless, if you write to running, it's going to auto commit.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a incantation of properties that can be used with the new data stores that give you the universal data store like behavior.
And a related question, could this be used for introducing a candidate data store in RESTconf?
It could be. So the revised data store draft in the IETF data store.yang module, it does define an identity for candidate. And this draft doesn't preclude the ability for that identity to appear. But at the same time, at this moment, we're not defining any operations like copy or commit. We could, but we're not at this time defining those operations. And then also, I think if we were to wanting to do that, we wouldn't, right? Because the shared candidate, I think it's a known issue that's a problem, and we'd prefer doing private candidates. So I don't think we should do that. If we were interested in doing candidate data stores at all, we should probably rethink how we do them.
We actually have an implementation that uses a per user candidate. So that, in my view, makes a lot of sense. So we would like to have some standard mechanism how to query these.
Exactly.
Two questions. The first, I asked at Arturis about the entity tag. Did you get a chance to ask Andy about that?
I did not.
No, okay. We'll do that offline then. Andy, it was whether we could use the entity tag for the client priority split for R2S for the dynamic ephemeral.
So for people that are online, Andy just said that we should double check with the HTTP people.
Yeah, and we'll do that. Thank you, Andy. That's helpful. That means we probably have to have metadata. I would like to not double use things. Okay. Second question is, section 3 dot, go back up to the sections that were ignored. Section 3.5.4, is that where you're defining the rollback? I thought it was in
No.
a different section.
No, it's not here. This section is regards the behavior of the server when a leaf is being targeted, and that leaf's value happens to be the same as the default value.
Mhm.
And what it says that the value must be returned all the time, regardless if the server supports explicit mode or not. And the reason why this is concerning is because if it's returned all the time, then the client doesn't actually know if it was if it was configured or not.
Yep. So wherever the rollback is defined, part of the requirements for you had to have a restriction on the rollback for the ephemeral. So I don't know if we need to add an augment that says we don't have to do it all the time. We could only report the requirements stated all or nothing, and your rollback, I think, didn't give me that option. Either we augment it as an option or we go forward. That was one of those requirements in the ephemeral state.
Okay, so I'm trying to think what you mean by rollback. So with RESTconf, it's pessimistic locking, right?
Yes.
So we're using ETAG or the if modified, and it's all or nothing. Either the server takes it or it doesn't.
Okay.
So there's nothing to
Then
roll
we're
back.
good to go.
But then there's a second thing, which is a rollback on error, right? The
Mhm.
traditional netconf, and that is addressed in the Yang library data store. So each data store has a list of properties. One of the properties that we've defined is called rollback on error, which has that semantic. If you want to have rollback on error on your
No, we
dynamic
do.
data store,
It is the RESTconf base functionality. So what you're telling me, to reflect back, just to confirm, RESTconf does the thing rollback all or rollback if there's error, the rollback at all if there's error, and the other part, if someone wanted to use it, they could put it in the Yang libraries that would then affect the ephemeral data stores, and that would be the implementations problem.
yes.
Just so as I was going to ask my question, the thing about rollback on error just triggered another one. So rollback on error in Netconf has two slightly different meanings depending on which data store you're working in. If it's on the candidate, it's the scope of that edit config, because the rollback on error is an attribute of the edit, not of the commit. Versus, I guess, with unified or running rights, it's intended to apply to the action of actually applying the config or not.
Well, there's two things. There's the error options that can be passed
Yeah.
into an edit config, for instance.
Exactly. So it's
and
got
then
scope of an
separately,
edit
there's
config.
actually the RPC called rollback on error.
Ah.
Right. So if you're doing sorry, it's not an RPC. It's a flag that's inside the commit operation. So as you're doing commit, you can pass a flag to say whether or not.
Is that okay? I'll have to go back. I wasn't familiar with that part.
Yeah, it's
So
in 6241, I think.
okay. The other question I had is we talked about library, how we're adding, now we had modules before, now we have to add data store information. Discussion about RESTconf just made me wonder, is the list of data, okay, so we have the single new tree that describes data stores and their properties. Are those properties going to be different for RESTconf versus NetConf? So if
No, remember, these are views. The protocols are views onto conceptual data stores. The properties are with the conceptual data store,
yeah,
which is independent of the protocol. So the protocol needs to support the properties, but the properties won't vary by protocol.
I'm more thinking about an implementation that has different support for different data stores on different types of interfaces. So you have a RESTconf server and a NetConf server on your box. You're not necessarily going to support the same data stores on both of those interfaces, are you?
You should. And through your
Well,
CLI.
dynamic? The dynamic data store, are you necessarily going to offer it on? I don't know if we need to, I'm not sure if we should say that when you advertise it necessarily means you have to support it on all possible interfaces that access data stores.
Well, if you can come up with a strong use case,
okay,
we can take it to the list.
Well, I mean, the use case I can think of is like an implementation who's maybe going to implement I2RS. They may do it over one interface to start, not multiple. So
Right,
they
but-
may support it over RESTconf to start, but not
Right,
Netconf.
but again, iTrust is a dynamic data store, and per the revised data store draft, each dynamic data store defines its own semantics, like from scratch. So whatever you support in the properties, may not, I mean,
Yeah,
yes.
so when you describe the data store in the state tree, it's fine, but that's the module state or the new library tree is going to be, presumably it's the same library tree you're reading through Netconf or RESTconf.
Mhm.
So then you advertise the dynamic in that. There's only one place to advertise the dynamic data store. And it gives you the impression that you support it through both
Okay, I'm
interfaces.
sorry, I think I now understand your question. Right, so it is in the Yang library draft, it says that the response that comes is actually with respect to the server that's responding. So the response could vary by a Netconf and RESTconf
Thanks.
server.
We are over time, so I'm sorry, I'll have to cut this out. So based on the questions, I'm going to assume that I think we need some more clarifications before we ask for work group adoption.
Actually, I thought I was handling all the questions if there was anything outstanding.
Then I'll ask the quick question. Were you intending, how do you know what's valid inside of the library? i.e., how do you know which modules might be valid for the dynamic data store? Is that going to be an IANA registry? So in case someone says, here's my catalog, is this really true? Are you trying to self-generate it, or are you trying to do it by registry?
So this is in the Yang library draft, and so the data store entry for the I2RS ephemeral data store would have a pointer to a module set, which is those modules that are supported inside that dynamic data store. Mhm.
Okay, so are you asking for, because I see questions here and you said you're taking it to the list, that's why I was.
We're going to continue the discussion on the list no matter what. I believe the working group should adopt this draft, even with questions outstanding. We have a milestone for bringing this to last call in the November timeframe, so it's
All right.
just a procedural thing as to whether or not we push for adoption now or a week from now.
Okay, so a show of hands from people that they feel the document is ready for work group adoption. Okay, a fair number. All right. So before we get off this, Phil, if I can ask you to take one more action item and to close on that whole discussion of what to do with GET as far as Netconf is concerned, the GET operation.
Okay, now we have a slot for NDMA architecture and guidelines. It'll be just a summary. Actually, we had this summary today, right? So questions can be answered quickly. We have less than 10 minutes time.
So this was the guidelines one, but I was going to, it's worth asking, does anyone actually want to hear guidelines again?
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So
does anyone in this show of hands again want Robert to go yet again over guidelines as far as NMDA, what they need, changes they need to make the model to be NDMA compliant? I guess we're good then. Thank you.
thank you very much. So now my coach has more time. Okay, now Mahesh will present on the accounting draft. These three, are, I mean, we need to go through them and discuss how can we adopt, or whether people are in favor of working on those topics.
All right. So I'm going to talk about the 03 version of the draft. As a quick introduction, this draft is essentially addressing the last A in AAA accounting and defines the Yang model for it. The changes since 01 have been, and I know I skipped 02 in between, but that was because I submitted a revision, is I changed the accounting record a little bit, and I'll talk about that. The addition of default deny all, trying to clarify the interaction with AAA server, and two additions. So let's, not in that same order that I had listed there. So I added default deny all just like NACM does to protect records. So you need an explicit rule to be defined if you need access to the accounting record. As far as modifications of the record are concerned, so I had a start-stop code, accounting start-stop code that was used if you wanted to fragment the accounting record as you were transmitting it. I dropped that simply because I think that's going to be implementation dependent. Depends who you're communicating with and whether they need that kind of fragmentation. So I'm going to leave it up to the implementations that need to fragment an accounting record to add that if as need be. I also added a message ID with session ID simply because there can be multiple messages within a session. And if you are trying to key, you would need that. There was a question on what happens to any values that we might want to capture as part of the accounting record. So example on a get is what was requested. So if there was a filter parameter that was asked for, we probably want to try to capture it in the accounting record so we know what was requested. But at the same time, it tries not to capture the entire response because that would be just huge, especially with get or get data. So just to make sure that that's true. And same with edit config, again, values for what are being modified as part of the edit config. Also added some examples in the appendix, 3 examples, particularly on edit config, get, and how to set the NACM rule, considering that there is a default deny all, what a rule has to look like for even a user like root to be able to get access to the accounting record. So with the change in record, this is what the tree diagram looks like. And as Mehmet mentioned, the next step is to ask for workgroup adoption. Questions?
Any comments, questions on this draft? Who read actually this draft? I saw only Andy. I mean, it has been already presented twice. This is the 3rd presentation. I mean, what I remember from last meeting, there were some people saying in favor, others were uneven or uninterested. Some were saying, I remember Kent stating that Netconf workgroup should start such work later, not now. But yeah, after getting comments from Jason, for example, I just need to know, again, the same question, who is in favor of working on this topic in Netconf working group? Jason?
So Jason Stern, I apologize, I've only skimmed through the draft, but I just want to confirm my understanding. I think it's not intended to instantiate data in the node. This is just like a format you're proposing. It's like so you're putting it as a container, but it's just to represent a format of a message that would go on a wire towards a AAA server. And I guess that format, I don't know, is it something we know that these AAA servers will recognize and be able to terminate that format?
Right. So one is that there is no format of what an accounting record looks like today. I mean, it's kind of free format in today. So one is to normalize that.
Well, there's TACAX and Radius accounting that probably has some sort of
but what
standard.
So I think Radius's statement somewhere I read is that they don't care what is in the payload. So this is to formalize that payload. What is exactly constitutes an accounting record. So for example, I asked the operators, what would you like to see in an accounting record? And so we went back and forth on trying to figure out what is an important piece of information for them. And based on that feedback, we came up with and I defined what an accounting record.
Okay. So I mean, there's one part of this that I think is is particularly useful is that, I guess, defining what's going to get captured up in those accounting records. You put an instance identifier just to say, okay, here's a piece of data in a Yang tree, and here's a value. I guess I'm just a little bit more concerned about whether this format is going to properly interwork with some of these other servers. Like you mentioned, it's the payload, but you have like start-stop fields and other things, what I think are part of the standard actually radius accounting message, aren't they? They're not just part of.
Yeah, so in
transparent
case of
payload,
us,
so-
so radius, when you're communicating with radius, and because it at least used to require fragmentation because it had a size limitation, you needed that. But that's particular to radius. If you're doing this, say, just doing a get over Netconf and doing a counting record get, you won't need to do the fragmentation. So that's why I took the accounting code out of the.
So I have to interrupt you. This is only a 5-minute slot.
Okay.
We need to be fair to the next two presenters. Please go ahead, Ken, very quick.
Sure, Kent Watson. My only question is this the right working group for the work? And is there another working group like diameter or radius working group that could take this up instead?
Only because, I guess from a counting, meaning a AAA perspective, since we were dealing with Macam.
So let me ask them the question quick because we need to move on. So we got the sense of the room in other meetings, but I have to ask again, who thinks this work should be done in Netconf workgroup? Show hands, please. I did not, did you show hand? I did not see any hand. So we need to note this, and Netconf co-chairs need to decide.
Can there be an
whether-
option to say we might need some more discussion to figure that out first?
Yeah, the mail list is open for discussion. I was trying to ask people several times to raise discussion on the mail list. So this is also the measure for the interests of the working group. Okay, so let's go ahead with the next one. Netconf proxy. So you've got 5 minutes.
Hi, working group. This is Michael from Huawei, and today I want to introduce the update for Netconf proxy. And this document already presented in last meeting, and I have received some a lot of comments. Most important thing is we need to address is to show the evidence that this machinism need to be done in the application layer and not in the transport layer. So we prepared another version to address the comments in the section to introduce use case and scenarios. And you can read the document section 1.2, and I also will introduce these scenarios and use cases in next 2 slides. Okay, this slide.
Please remember on time management, you've got now 4 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So first scenario is using Netconf proxy to manage the NFV instance, and we can see the picture that shows the left is EMS connect to the NFV through the public network, and the within the NFV network, the private protocols such as TCP is running through the WinF instance, and this TCP will provide the data to the Netconf. To manage the NFV instance, the EMS will connect to the NFV through the Netconf proxy, and the proxy located in the WinFM. Within the WinF management, within the WinF network, the Netconf data will transport from the proxy to the WinF instance through Netconf over TCP, and the NFV instance will report the ID to the proxy. The proxies can report, the proxy can restore them in the touch list, and then the EMS can using the touch list to management this NFV instance. this is the second scenario is just introduced using the Netconf proxy to management non-gateway element. And showing this figure, the EMS connect to the gateway element through public network. And within the optic switch network, some private protocols such as QS protocol are running through this network element. And within the NSH network, QS protocol will provide the data to the Netconf. And notice that this optic switch network, the network element may be not some IP device that the NAT cannot be used to report their IP to the Netconf client. And to management this non-gateway element, the EMS can connect to the non-gateway element through the Netconf proxy, and the proxy located in the gateway element within NSH network, within the ONS network, and the Netconf data will be transported from the proxy to the non-gateway element. And the non-gateway element will report the ID to proxy. The proxy can restore them in the touch list. Then the EMS can be on the touch list to management this non-gateway element.
Okay, I need to ask the necessary questions. Just you can say one or two sentences, and we need to go on.
Okay. That's last. Yeah,
Okay,
this is
so
the last
who read this draft?
slide.
Please show hands. Who thinks Netconf working group should work on this topic? Okay, so as we, I assume Mahesh thinks the same. This is not in the current focus, I mean, in the focus of the current charter. We need to come back to this later. Please update as you already wrote, get more comments and update it, and especially raise a discussion on the mail list to get support.
Okay, thank you.
So this is important before coming back to the next Netconf session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, working group.
Okay, the last one is the UDP. This might be in the focus of the current charter because it is related to the Netconf, I mean notification set of drafts. So please go ahead.
Okay. Then I need to go very fast. The UDP-based publication channel for streaming telemetry. There are several YAML-push-related work in IETF, and our work is based on them. The problem we are going to solve is to collect a large amount of data from devices with mainboard and line cards. The existing solution consider only one push server residing in the mainboard. As you can see from the figure, the data are collected from line cards and aggregated to the mainboard. So the mainboard can easily become the bottleneck, especially when large amount of data. So what we are proposing here is the distributed data collection mechanism that can push data directly from line cards to the collector. Then why UDP? The YAML push mechanism supports the separation of subscription control and the transport for data stream. That means we can use different channel for subscription and publication. Two existing transports are Netconf and the RESTconf. Both of them are TCP based. If we use the TCP based transport for the distributed data collection, then the collector will suffer a lot of connections. And UDP is lightweight, so high frequency and better transit performance can be achieved, which is important for streaming telemetry. And since no connections they need to be maintained, the UDP encapsulation can be easily implemented by hardware that can further improve the performance. Here's the brief overview of our solution. The subscriber send a request to the via the subscription channel, and the subscription server will decompose the request and distribute them to the agents, and then the line cards can push data directly to the collector. There are several technical points need to work out. Firstly, we need to define the subscription model, and then the interaction between subscription server and the agent, and also the UDP-based message header, and also the retransmission procedure if we want to apply or consider the reliable subscription, and also congestion control. Here's our preliminary design on the UDP telemetry header, and you can see the flag indicates the supported features on reliability, authentication, encryption, and so on. And there are also many other fields defined in the draft. That's all, and we seek feedback and cooperation.
Okay, as I said, this can be seen in the current focus of the charter. Phil?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, finish your comment first.
I need to ask some questions, but go ahead. We don't have time for more comments, but we should get your comment.
So I support this work. This is stuff that we do in Junos as well. I think it's very common. You know, a lot of work needs to be done on the particulars, but something in this space is standardizing in this space is certainly very important.
Thank you.
Okay. So who read this draft? More than 10 or something? 9 to 10. Who thinks UDP-based publication channel for streaming telemetry is important for Netconf and we should work on it? Same amount or even more, 10 to 12. Okay, I'm not going to count everything. It's more than 10 in any case. So people are in. So I was not in favor of starting an immediate adoption, but I'm keen of asking Netconf co-chairs. Now I include Ken because you guys need to decide when to go for adoption.
Yeah, I think we'll be taking it to the list.
So you want to start a call for adoption on the list? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, so it'll be done soon somewhere. So that's it actually, Phil?
The other option is doing a design team and getting the folks together on that. If you're open to that.
So you mean this should be done in the so-called design team? Together with other Yang push drafts?
I think this is different than Yang push.
I don't know. So this will be then discussed with the co-chairs. And
Right. One last thing. All the problem you're mentioning, that's the one we've been going from NetFlow to IPFix and exporting from line card. So there's a lot to learn over there.
Okay. Okay. So that's it for today. Thank you very much. Hope to see you in Singapore. Then I will sit together with you in the room. Yeah, so
the beer party in honor of you tonight.
There are some information available. You can get the location info from Mahesh. We don't have a slide for this. So I will write down what I noted. Very, very short, shorter than short.
Okay.
You can add to it. What's that? So these are together?
Yeah, it goes in here.
Oh, okay. So you can send it to me if you want me to look at it, or just skip me. For the summary.
Oh, no, no,
the
you
main
did.
list.
No, absolutely. It says after Prague, we are still in Prague.
Yeah, but anyway, I don't know.